You know what we're going to do is we're going to indulge now in a band that I'm glad we're going to be covering because it was originally just going to be a single. We were going to cover No Rain, which of course was
Yeah.
a gigantic song
Yep.
in the
Even I knew
90s.
this one.
Yeah,
Crossed
yeah,
over.
that's a famous song, famous video.
Yep.
Both of them huge, and and also Shannon Hoon, the lead singer, has made an appearance because he was famously friends with Axl Rose, and he's in the "Don't Cry" video, if I remember
Oh,
correctly,
okay.
as well. Yep. So somewhat strange bedfellows, but I want to say, and I'll look this up so that I clean the stacks. I want to say like Shannon Hoon was from Indiana as well.
No,
But
he's
we'll
from
look.
Mississippi, I think.
Is he from
I saw.
Mississippi? Okay.
Yeah, I was kind of
I know he
reading about
wasn't
them.
from the West, but they found each other. You know what I mean? Shared traits.
Yep.
So yeah, Blind Melon, a band that came and went pretty quickly because unfortunately Shannon Hoon did die young. So R.I.P. there.
Of a drug overdose, is that right?
It was a drug
Yeah.
overdose. Yep. It was the 90s, Josh. So I mean that's if you're gonna go
Unfortunately
early.
common.
I mean, on one hand, it's good that people were dying in like car accidents and plane crashes, like they were in other eras. On the other hand, it's probably going to be drugs if you're young. So,
Yeah.
well, let's just jump into it because we went a little long on the singles and stuff like that. I can give a little bit of color to the bio as
Yep.
we'll weave it into our take. But what initial thoughts of this one?
Yeah, like you said, you said the only two things I knew about this band: the No Rain video and Shannon Hoon and him dying. And I was pleasantly surprised by this album. I didn't know what to expect, or I expected more like what No Rain is like, and No Rain is not really indicative of what the rest of this album is.
Yeah, it's a slight outlier, isn't it?
Yes, and so that was not unwelcome. I really kind of liked their sound and was pleased by what I heard. It is this interesting mix of like southern rock meets grunge meets Led Zeppelin and like I don't know, roots rock, Americana, some funk thrown in there, and all of that kind of like mishmash made for a really interesting listen. He's got a pretty good voice. He reminded me of Jane's Addiction, Perry Farrell at times,
for
singing. He's got some range and some power in his singing, and I think he really is kind of like channeling the southern rock that we've talked about in the 70s in his kind of delivery and in the themes throughout the song too. Just I don't know, it does feel like southern inflected, right, to you? Do you agree with that?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. In fact, the band's name comes from a term that one of the band members, Brad Smith, who is the bassist, that his dad used to describe hippies.
Okay.
That's where Blind Melon comes from.
So it's really not that far removed from Black Crows, from the single that we talked about. There's definitely some, I feel like, some overlap. I think maybe I was expecting kind of more grunge just because they're always, I don't know, lumped in with Gen X in my mind or something, and those other more famous, Smashing Pumpkins, Nirvana, et cetera, and Sonic Youth and all that. And that's not really what they sound like. And so this is a pretty solid rock record. It's a little long. I do feel like some of the songs run together in my mind, but there is ones that stand out for me, like Tones of Home, Dear Old Dad, Holy Man. Those are, in the, spread throughout the album. And overall, this was a very pleasant listen. There wasn't really any weak sounds. I guess there's not a standout track other than No Rain, probably, or something that necessarily rises up to the distinctive.
Tones of Home was a single I remember hearing on the radio too.
It's a very good song. But I guess in terms of, I don't know, I guess that would be, I guess No Rain was such a big hit. There's nothing that's on the rest of the album that compares to that, is what I'm trying to say in terms of popularity.
Well, some of it is, do we even know? Because it's hard to even process this album without here. It's one of those albums in the 90s where there's this song. It's like, there's other bands like that, where there's a song that's so the first thing you think, like Possum Kingdom for the Toadies, right? Would be another example of a song that's almost bigger. That's like a very 90s thing, I feel like, where there's this like one undeniable song with a video.
Yep.
That, yeah.
Yeah. So, but that is, I would actually recommend this. I'm glad we talked about this album because it was a pleasing listen. I feel like it was good to hear kind of like some straight ahead rock and roll that wasn't, I don't know, it's got its own unique spin, but it's also so reminiscent of many other things. And I don't know, it's just a solid rock album ultimately is what I'm trying to say. So thumbs up for me.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because technically I guess these guys were an LA band because that's where they formed. But as you mentioned, there's 3 Mississippi transplants. There's a so I'm looking right now and I'm seeing that they're saying that Roger Stevens and Brad Smith, the guitarist and bassist, were from Mississippi. But I'm reading that Shannon Hoon was from Lafayette, Indiana.
Oh, okay. So you're right.
Josh.
Maybe
I so I think that I remember, that, and I mean, Shannon Hoon famously sings the background vocals on "Don't Cry," right? Okay. So like, and when you hear that song, you're like, oh yeah, I could definitely hear that now, like when you hear his voice. But yeah, he's an Indiana guy, just like Axl Rose and most of the Guns guys were that weren't Slash, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other guitarist is originally from Pennsylvania, so it's kind of like all these guys kind of came together in L.A. So it's a little bit of the Guns N' Roses narrative, right? Like guys from small towns, come to different places. But these guys don't sound like Guns N' Roses. I think they're a little bit of a throw. They're almost jammy. They're like almost like a jam.
That was the other thing.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. They were like,
and
kind of hippie-ish in a way too.
Oh, they're definitely like the Shannon Hoon's vibe and sort of even the B girl, right, is just sort of this. It's very much a hippie sort of vibe. And like, I know that about them, but it always surprises me when I listen to the album. I'm like, yeah, this is way more jammy, but this is my type of jam music because it doesn't overstay its welcome. I think the song construction's a little bit more linear, I think, but it has the free form that identifies it as a jam band, but not so much that it overwhelms the melody and you're getting to the next point, which I think helps it quite a bit. I know that during this album, in terms of doing some research for this, they originally recorded this album and then they thought it was too slick. And so they went back into the studio. They relocated to like Durham, North Carolina, and they kind of did it live without overdubs. So this album was a live album pretty much with not many overdubs. And it sounds that way. There's an energy to it. It does sound a little bit like a live album when you know that. Now, I did not know it the first time I listened this week, then did a little bit of research and listened to it the second time with those ears, and it does connect. The producer had produced 10 by Pearl Jam, which I thought was interesting too. Rick Parashar was there. And this was another sort of like some other bands we covered, like Gin Blossoms comes to mind and stuff like that, where this album is out, right? And it's not selling super well. And then a video comes, it gets some some airplay, and next thing you know, they're huge. Yeah. And in this case, Blind Melon is one of those things that I think that even my parents could tell you, oh, that's the B video. You know what I mean? Because it crossed into their world a little bit. It became quadruple platinum. It's funny to look at who they opened for. They opened for Soundgarden, Neil Young, Lenny Kravitz, and kind of it all works because their sound is pretty malleable in its own way. So you could see how they're slightly hard rock enough to. I think Soundgarden was probably their hardest audience to play for, but certainly Lenny Kravitz and Neil Young, you could see how they go there. They're at Woodstock 94. They're the opener for the Stones on Voodoo Lounge, which I thought was interesting. But unfortunately, that's around when Shannon Hoon gets the drug addiction. They relocate to New Orleans. They make the album Soup, which I can remember owning and enjoying. It's got a song called Galaxy I like a lot. That was the single too. And they went out to tour for it, unfortunately. And in the research I had, I guess Shannon Hoon had a drug counselor who strongly encouraged them not to go on tour because he didn't think it would end well. I guess they decided to bring along a someone as like an attendant kind of, but he was dismissed. And a couple weeks after that, unfortunately, he overdosed on cocaine
Jeez.
he had a heart attack from the overdose and passed away in 1995 as a very, very young man. And the group, I think, knew pretty much immediately that I think they said they knew that was the end of their chapter because the band was so associated with him. But he was only 28 years old.
Jeez.
So.
Yeah. Well, this is a good. It's unfortunate because this is a good.
They took a lot of shit for his
sound.
I remember his voice was very polarizing with people, but even at the time, I never found his voice. Maybe it's like we talked Billy Corgan before. I heard that a lot, but I never processed it as being an unappealing voice for me because it's on tune. It's got a little bit of, I guess, what you call like whine and wail to it, but but not in a way that I find distracting. But I guess for most people, the sound of his voice is what sticks out. It's certainly noticeable, but I think what stood out to me was the expansive guitar work and just how jam bandy it was behind him. So,
and his voice works really well with their sound and and kind of the rock guitar that they have and everything. So.
It kind of sounds like the guitars at times.
Yeah.
It's got a little bit of like a guitar effect to it at times as a vocal instrument.
Yeah. So thumbs up from you too. It sounds like.
Yeah, I like this album. I it's not like an aggressive thumbs up. It's just a solid thumbs up.
Yeah.
But every time I listen to this album, I realize I like it more than I think I'm gonna like it, and I think it does sort of slip through my reference point sometimes because it's of the era because of the video and the look of the band, but it's in some ways not of the era because it doesn't fully sound like a lot that was around it at this time.
Yeah.
Remember, this is a couple years before sort of like the Horde tour bands become mainstream, right? So this is sort of like a chaser for that. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Didn't think about
you know what
that.
I mean by that, right? The tour that was sort of
that's like Blues Traveler
pitched
and
as like
stuff, right?
Blues Traveler was on it, but you also had like Rusted Root and Fish and String Cheese Experience, or the different bands like that, right?
Yeah. Matt likes those bands, I think.
He does. He's definitely the biggest jam band fan of us. So if we had him here, we'd talk about it. But I know he has a relationship with this album, so maybe we'll give him a little space next episode.
Oh yeah, I'd be interested
talk
to hear
about
that.
it. So, but yeah, sounds like 2 thumbs up.